Hello everybody, welcome back to another edition of the EcoStruxure Machine Expert Training. I'm your host, Leandro Mada, and in this video we're going to talk about the variables on the PLC, how we can store the information on the controller and we don't lose that when we power cycle the controller. So let's go to the presentation. So as mentioned a few seconds ago, sometimes when we have, for example, the configuration of our machine, we don't want that information is lost in Spanish from the controller. We need to save that. So today we're going to show you how we can do that. So if we continue with this part of the presentation, it's simple, okay? Basically, when we have the POUs or the GBLs, the global variable list, if we are in the tabular view, as you can see over here, let me just change this and add this part. As you can see over here, this one is the tabular view and this one is the textual view. If we go in the textual view, we have this like a property, okay, that is called a scope. This scope property, okay, is the one that we need to change in order to retain and have the value when we power cycle the unit. So probably the best thing to do here to easily change that, if we don't know how to write the property or the scope, is to change the view from textual to the tabular. If you're in the textual, it's much easier. So in the scope, you also see the same. So this value, as you can see, is the same. The only additional thing is in the textual is this part. So everything between these two text is going to be our global. That's all. So the same can be applied to the POUs. As you can see, you have the bar as a scope, okay, it's the same. And here between bar and end bar, so the finish of the bar properties is going to be like a local variable on the POU in this case. So if we download this to the controller without doing anything else, once we power cycle the unit, the information of our configuration is going to be lost, okay? So we need to change this property on the GBL in order to retain the values of our configuration. So continue with this. So all we need to do is to add this property, retain persistent or persistent retain. Here it doesn't matter the order. We need to specify they have these two properties. And here is something important. You can do that on the POU, okay, but I recommend to do this on the GBL because it's the global variable list and you can create your own set or your own GBL only for the persistence, okay, that we're gonna see that later. So instead of using this property on the POU, use it on the GBL or use the specific option that I'm going to show you. So the process is very simple, okay? We just need to add, the easiest way to do is to change from textual to tabular, okay? And in the tabular, we just click on the scope in order to add this retain persistent or persistent retain. The order doesn't matter. So we just need, when we are in the tabular view, okay, we just click over there. We should be able to see the scope and then the flags, okay, which are the properties that we have. So we have retain, select, then you should be able to see this view. And then if we click again, we should be able to select the persistent again. So this, very simple. There is nothing else to do in this part of the GBL. Okay, so this will allow me to have the information when we make one reset on the controller. Okay, so now what is retain, what is persistent? Okay, some of this information is in the help, okay, but basically what you need to do is to select retain persistent, okay, and then add a specific object, okay, which is this where's the mouse here, like a persistent list object, okay, and in the persistent list option we have an option to add all instance path. This instance path will add all the variables that we have defined as persistent. Okay. Otherwise, if you define this on the GBL as a retain persistent, okay, you will receive this message over here, okay, that the variable that you have defined retain persistent or only persistent, okay, need to use the command add all instance on the persistent variable list, okay, that we have created. I'm going to show you. And something important here is that even if you have defined as a var persistent declaration, okay, the system is the same way that you have defined as a persistent retain or retain persistent, okay, it doesn't matter. So if you want to store the information, okay, once you already configure or define all the values in the system, okay, you just need to add the flags that we saw, retain persistent, okay, and then I'm going to show you now this option, the persistent variables that we can use, okay. So here's more information you can have here. Basically, retain is related to the resin worm, okay, persistent to the resin cold, and also when you have a fault in the controller, okay, it will lose information if you want to select retain, okay. So recommendation, select retain persistent or persistent retain, doesn't matter, and then add all the instance paths that I'm going to show you here, okay. Something important here is this, is the reset origin, okay, that allowed us to reinitialize the variables, okay, we have configured. So let me just go back here to the presentation here. So in order to add this persistent list, okay, we just need to go to the application tree, okay, right click on the controller, add objects, and then select the persistent variables. So you can see over here, they have this nail, okay. Once you select this new GBL, okay, that basically all the values will be created as a retain persistent, okay, you can define a new name or leave it as it, and then add. Once it's added, okay, you can see in the top of the declaration of this view, you can see that the variables is going to have by default persistent retain, and between this you should be able to declare all the variables that you have, okay. So one way to do it is, as we saw before, define the variables on each GBL that you have as a persistent retain or retain persistent, and then create this add all instance path to create a path in this new GBL, okay, the persistent GBL, with the complete path for the other GBLs. So you can have this persistent retain property on the variables, okay. Another solution will be to directly define all the variables that you want to be the configuration of your machine in here, okay, which is also valid. So if we continue with this part, so what we need to do once on the GBL, as you saw in this example, I have defined the retain persistent, okay. I have created these persistent bars, which is this one, okay, or here. So if we right click over here in the GBL, in the persistent GBL, we have this option. Once we create this option over here, you should be able to see that the system generates the complete path. And if you take a look, this GBL is the name of this GBL over here, and then complete with the variable that I have created over here as a retain persistent. Okay, so this is simple, okay. You have the two ways I explained. You can define as a add all instance path or create the variables over here, and the creation of the variables is the same as the GBL. But if I'm not wrong, I'm gonna check it, is that the variables that you have created in this persistent bars are not allowed to have an address, okay. So let's go to the presentation, and now it's time to play on the software. So let's create some variables for persistent, then retain, and add all the persistent bars, okay, so we can play on the behavior on the controller. So I have this application, okay, the TM241, M3.1. So I'm going to create a new GBLs. GBL, sorry. Object, global variable list. So GBL, let's create training. GBL training. Okay, so add. Here you can see the bar global. Now, if you change to tabular view, you should be able to add new variables, insert. I'm going to add, for example, W bar 01 is going to be word. I'm going to define a position, percentage NW10, initialization would be 10, and now I'm going to create a new one, W bar 01 underscore retain. Okay, yes. Percentage NW, NW 11, initialization 11, LW bar 01 underscore retain persistent, just the name, okay, just to identify the variable data. So here we just need to click here in the scope, retain again, and retain persistent. Okay, now if we compile this, probably I need to call this in one POU. Just delete this. Let me just check, because I was playing with this before. POU training, structure tests program. Okay, bar GBL training dot, just to add this over here, and then I'm going to call it the must. There we go. So let's see the behavior now. I'm going to show you the PLC in there. Don't pay attention to all these cables over here. So let's connect to the controller. Yes, going to connect. Login. Okay, download. Okay, so first thing that I want to show you here in the warning, we should be able to have something about the this. So I have created this variable over here, retain persistent, as a retain persistent, but I haven't created the instance path on the GBL. Okay, that's why it asked me for this. It showed me this warning. So what I'm going to do is to create a GBL with a retain persistent. So add object, persistent variables. We can change this, for example, GBL config, the configuration for a machine, it doesn't matter. So here I'm going to create a new variable, W bar 02 word, initialization is going to be 20, and here in address, if I know wrong, it shouldn't allow me. If I know wrong, it allow me because it's not defined as a retain persistent. Okay, by default it creates this, but once you select a tabular, it creates a new variable. Okay, create a new one, and the new one by default is global. That's why it doesn't appear as a retain persistent. Otherwise, you can go over here if it's textual and add, for example, like this, W3 30. Okay, it doesn't matter. It's gonna be the same at the end. So what we can do now, let's see if I can address. Okay. Okay, so I wasn't wrong at the end. So here, even if I allowed you here to put the address, in the past it just showed you a message. Seems to be now is a change. We cannot define a direct address over here. Okay, so if we use the definition of a new variable on the GBL, okay, for this with the nail, okay, we must not use address over here. Okay. If you want to add address, another solution will be to use the relocation table to call these variables, as I showed you before. But now let's see the behavior of this information. So I'm going to connect to the controller now. Probably I should use this here. What was the name? GBL Config.W2. Just want to show you with the PLC that when I remove the power supply, it's going to lose information, which variables are going to lose information and which ones not. Okay, so, okay, good. Okay, so what we have done here is to download the initial configuration. Okay, as you can see over there, all the variables are in there. So I'm going to change this. I'm going to change this to 20, 21, 22. Okay, and 40, 50. So if I disconnect now from the CPU, okay, remember the values, 20, 21, then I'm going to remove the power supply. You can see in there, no light, no light. So I'm going to connect it again. Let's wait for it to start the communication once again. Let's see if I can pin the device to F1. Just wait for it. So wait for it to finish. Now pause this. There we go. So we should have the communication once again. So we connect to the controller. You see in there that the information has been lost, and it has the initial one that we have initialized in the configuration. Okay. So now what is missing here is this. So if we go in the textual view, we can delete all these to be in the same. And now if we right click and define to add all instance path, you should add the GBL training this variable over here, retain persistent. So right click, add all instance path, and you can see over here that add the GBL training, the persistent variable that I have defined before. Okay, so now if I want to initialize this information, let's try to download again and see how we can change the initialization of the variables. Login, Okay. So GBL, how to download everything. So 10, 21. So now if I want to change the actual value, okay, imagine that I'm going to log out. Okay, instead of changing the actual configuration or add a new value, for example, 3250, 5320. Okay, here what I can do is to log in again, but even if I change the initialization, it's not going to change the actual value of the variable. If I'm not wrong, if 50 and 40, one of those, there we go, it doesn't affect the change. So in order to change that, what we need to do is to make a reset origin. Okay, let me just check something here. I don't remember seeing this. Let me just no, that's much better. So in the past, I don't remember having this, which is good. So in the past, what we need to do in order to change this configuration was to create a reset origin. Okay, so we delete all this information that is in the configuration, okay, or the GBL for persistent, and then we need to download again. So the initial configuration isn't there. But now, I wasn't aware of this until now, is this, the reset persistent variable. So if we have a new set of configuration and we want to leave it on the machine, okay, we can configure the GBL and then have these reset persistent variables. As you saw, they just reset the actual values with the one that I have already defined, which is actually good, because imagine that you have the machine and someone changed the variables over here, 87, change that. You can always go to the default online reset persistent variables, yes, which is good. Okay, so this is how you can store the information in the controller. Okay, as you saw over here. I just want to check something here. GBL 12. Yes, so if you want to store the information, basically what you can do is to define on the variables global retain persistent. Okay, and then you have that on the GBL. If you define retain persistent and you don't add the GBL with the name, this one, on the configuration, you will receive a message on the system telling you that you haven't added the old instance path in there. And so you should be able to add this GBL for the persistent bars and then add all instance path. The other way is to add directly your configuration over here, okay, on the GBL persistent, and then if you want to use an address, or you can move it to a different GBL variable and then assign the value, or what you can do is to add the relocation table to add that variable. So this is it for the persistent, how you can save the data when you power off and power on the controller. I believe it's simple if you follow the process. So thank you very much for watching this video, and I see you on the next one.